So I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah, I can jump in. So my name is Frances Ravensbergen. I'm one of the people who helped get COCo started. And I think it's really neat that COCo has asked me to talk a little bit about the history and the evolution of COCo. I think all of us have it from our own perspective, and so what you'll get is kind of my perspective on how things have evolved over time. What I thought I'd talk a little bit about is kind of how and when and why COCo started and who was involved, and then a little bit more about kind of its evolution and some of the key benchmarks or events along the way that bring us a little bit to today, but maybe leave us a little bit behind, because there's lots of people around who have been around for a while and moving things forward.
Yeah.
So how did COCo start? The story I like to tell, and history is always everybody's individual story. There were a bunch of us who were working at Community Education Services, CES, in the school board in adult education in the 90s. And the education system was reformed at that point in time, and the service was closed down. And what we had been doing was trying to move from individual 10-week, 3-hour training programs with community groups, which was the mandate that that department had given itself, to doing more organizational development work. So it was kind of board work and governance and dealing with conflict and that sort of thing. When it got closed down, it was actually a blessing in disguise, and I think that's one of the wonderful lessons learned about COCo's history, and I'd like to talk a little bit about lessons learned as I look at the history. And so what was neat about it was that we were kind of like a square peg in a round hole in the school board. And the closure, the lack of funds, forced us to look at what we were doing, what we really needed to be doing, and how we needed to be structured. We went around and started doing a needs assessment, a couple of us. It was mostly Michael Stevens and myself that were interested in continuing to do this kind of work. And we spoke to about 68 different people, organizations, about this idea of how do you make training happen, and who would it be for, and what would it be focusing in on. And we started pulling that together, but we were doing it kind of slowly, at our own speed. And then we got a call from McConnell Foundation, who had met us when we were at CES and who had asked us what was going on with our future and what we thought about the role of kind of second-level service providers, so second-level organizations, so organizations that support frontline service providers. And McConnell called me at home and said, so we haven't heard anything from you. Do you have an application? We'd like to give you some money. And that was wonderfully shocking, because I've always had to fight for funding, and here was a funder actually offering money for something to happen. And I think that's a bit of a lesson also, that there's something about the broader context within which we're working. And when we're the flavor of the month or flavor of the decade, money is there a lot more easy than when you're not what the funders are really interested in. And funders had really been seeing, with the professionalization of the sector, frontline service organizations really struggling with the increasing demands that they had. So they saw the importance of an organization like COCo to do it, and saw the gap that it didn't exist for the English-speaking community, even though we had some services available in the broader Francophone community sector. So we very quickly started putting together an application for McConnell, and at about that time there was what I saw as kind of a critical incident that happened. Lennoxville Women's Center called me and asked me if I would come and do some work with them. So off I went, over 2 hours of driving, to work with them for 2 hours, 2 hours driving back, and I thought, I'm never going to make money doing it this way. You can't charge a community group for that kind of time and investment. And yet they were so keen and enthusiastic about having that kind of support. And that kind of made the thinking go from Montreal, where we had been focusing a little bit more, to Quebec-wide, that we really needed to look in a broader way at providing this kind of a service. McConnell was a little more interested. I mean, it was to do the start. It was definitely a little bit more Montreal-based. We pulled together the information we'd gotten from our assessment, and we put in the application, and they funded us for originally 3 years, and then it pulled out to be a little bit longer. And it was really seed funding, and I think we need to remember that as an organization, and as we think about our history moving forward, always going back and remembering the role that the McConnell Foundation played and honoring that role in getting COCo started. So in January 2000, COCo started. We had applied for the incorporation papers in the fall. They came through. The YMCA was very kind to give us some space in the beginning. One of the wonderful things was going through where did we want to be located, and the fact that we're here right now in Jean Mance is actually quite symbolic. We felt that one of the roles of COCo was to bridge the English and the Francophone community sectors, and we felt that being near kind of the divide between the two communities was a good place to be. So there was some symbolism in where we ended up. When we first started with the Y, we thought we might be there for a long time. They gave us some space, and then they went through a redevelopment process, and they didn't have space anymore, so we had to move fairly quickly. But things in the first couple of years did move fairly quickly. We had Sontrade contact us I think it was about a year and a half into existing, and again, very similar to McConnell, they said, you don't have an application form in. And we said, well, I remember saying to them, well, next year we were thinking of applying. It's kind of busy right now. And their response was, you better get your application form in because there's some monies sitting here for you. So flavor of the month, really, funders wanted to fund the kind of work that COCo had been looking at doing. It really came out of a need in the sector as the sector was changing. And I think we often forget that in our struggles in community groups when we're fighting so hard to get funding, that the broader context has such an impact on our ability to get accepted or not in terms of the kind of work that we're trying to do. In the beginning, who was involved? So Michael and I were the two key staff people, Michael Stevens and myself. There were a few trainers that had come from CES that became trainers originally with COCo. I'm thinking of people like Naomi Kahane, Stephanie Garreau, Gillian Keefe, were some of the people, Manuela Pedersen, that started doing some training with COCo. But it was mostly the staff front, Michael and myself, and we worked very hard with Hugh Maynard, who was the third person who signed the incorporation papers. Very consciously in the beginning, started small. Very small board of directors. Our advisory committee, where lots of people came and went, but we wanted to keep the development and the foundational thinking of the organization really true to the original thoughts that we had had coming out of the assessment and our experience at Community Education Services. So we had people like Lance Evoy, Beth Moray, John Britton, Eric Schrag involved, sometimes on the board, sometimes on the advisory committee, and other people also. But really it was very much a co-directorship in the first couple of years that was organizing things. We worked with a structure that had facilitators. We actually had about 8 facilitators, all using the same training approach, and then a very small staff team. And it's interesting to see how through our evolution we moved to everyone being on staff, and now we seem to be almost back to where we started in some ways, in terms of having a couple of people, not always just facilitators, but doing short-term projects or really being more on contract, and then a small core team. Instead of 2, it's 3 now that really coordinate the management and the direction of the organization along with the board. So that was the beginning. A couple of things that were important. One was that we felt that everyone should be working part-time at COCo because we wanted people to be engaged in the community sector and not only have COCo living the realities of the community sector so that we would have both credibility and understanding and knowledge in our work with groups, but that we would also have different issues that we'd been involved in as individuals. And that's held pretty much true. It's very rare that we've had anybody working full-time. Maximum has been kind of 4 days a week, with that idea that you're learning and growing by going to school yourself, or you're involved in volunteer work, or you're taking a contract, so that you're learning in other ways, and trying to be very much a learning organization, although that wasn't the language that we necessarily used at the beginning. We also prided ourselves in the salary scale. At that point it was, and this was 2000, $30 an hour was a pretty good wage for people to be getting, and there was a little bit of eyebrow raising that went on in certain circles around that. We haven't increased the salaries a whole lot since then, and so the sector has caught up a little bit more, but our idea was we wanted to make sure that there was value placed on the work that we were doing. And one of the ways to do it was to honor and respect the knowledge and the skills that people had who were doing it. It connected to how we charged organizations also. We had and we still have a fee structure in place, always with the ability to have a subsidy, but to start off saying this work of organizational change is valuable, comes from a knowledge base, and it's worth something. And if you can't pay it, then you can pay less, but we're not going to start from that assumption that nobody has any money to pay for it. One of the challenges that we had around the salaries over the years was that as the sector was increasing the salaries, COCo was struggling to be able to do that because of the budget realities. And there was also a wave in the sector coming very much from the Francophone community sector around making sure that there were proper benefits in place, as a lot of people who had started in the 70s were starting to reach retirement age and realizing they didn't really have much to fall back on. We don't have yet in place a really great benefit package, and so that's an interesting one in terms of looking at the principle we started from and where we are now in terms of that. Some of the learnings, I think, as we were getting going, starting small on purpose, I think that's a really good one, to not lose control of things and to really be very clear about foundational things, putting in place structures. Michael was amazing, drove me crazy, but he was amazing at making sure that we had policies in place, definitions in place for things, filing systems in place, color-coded, important stuff when you're starting off, because those are the kinds of things that stay with an organization over time. And then you can grow more purposefully. With the small beginning, there was a lot of interactions with members through either advisory committee involvement, all the networking, the events that we did, the trainings, the info COCos, all of those things have been steady over time, that we've been doing those kinds of activities. But the actual decision making was held by a much smaller group of people. And it was interesting with time, when we moved into a different funding scenario, that we had to look at expanding the membership. It was when we started looking at getting the MELS funding that there was a sense that to show that we had good community engagement, which was a requirement for funding through the provincial government for core organizational funding. We started expanding the board and talking more about the whole question of membership engagement. And one of the things that raised for me is the importance of really being clear all along about the role of members and why we're changing structures, and whether there's a deep organizational commitment to changing the role of members and how we engage them. And I think this is an issue that we're still working with a lot at COCo. So those were the beginnings. Programming pretty much the same, info COCos, contracts, it's interesting. It's been 13 years now. Every year there's sort of between 40 and 60 contracts, and I say that's about the same because you have to be careful that one contract could be 3 hours, another one could be a year of very intense work. But when you look at it overall, pretty steady in terms of the numbers of organizations, numbers of contracts, except one year we had a real dip that we never understood, even though we tried to. Mm-hmm. Events, activities, projects, so whether it was funding, whether it was all the legal work that we did, more of the anti-O and diversity work that we're doing now, research projects that we've done. We've had different things come and go. Very creative names. Michael Stevens started that. Sarah Blumel kind of continued that. So we had things like Wagging the Tail and The Dog That Bites. I can't even remember quite the titles, but it was really interesting ways of putting things out there, like is the dog wagging the tail, or is the tail wagging the dog, was something about funding with the provincial government and who really controls where funding is going and where the purpose and mission of community-based organizations is going. So that was a nice one, having that kind of creative element, and COCo was kind of known for that and has continued that in a lot of ways, with trying to be creative with the way that we've done our AGMs, trying to push things around the use of our website and how we put things out there on our website. And that bit of a creative flair is a nice piece to see lived out at different times depending on the people who are here over the history of the organization. All right.
All right.
Great. So let me just chat a little bit now about the benchmarks and evolution of COCo, and you're obviously getting my take on it, and I think that's where it's nice to maybe afterwards get other people to add their ideas a little bit more. So I was thinking a little bit about using the house that COCo uses a lot to look at organizations and the health of organizations. And the first piece is the foundations. So mission, vision, values, approach, that kind of thing. And it's interesting to see how over the last 13 years of COCo's work, that's been pretty steady. I mean, we adapted the mission statement a little bit to reflect some changes that happen around being a charitable organization and that sort of thing. But the actual purpose for COCo has very much stayed the same. We're emphasizing more now, which is really wonderful, this idea of kind of movement building and wanting to really be a more active player in that area of social change, whereas in the past it was more we talked about it with organizations and kind of left it with them to do it. But the foundations, I think, have pretty much actually stayed the same over the last 13 years, which is kind of neat to see. The funding, which is another part of the house, the structure of how you are in society as a community organization. Funding grew to a certain point and has been fairly stable. So McConnell came on first with some core funding. Sontrade has been a really wonderful partner over time and very supportive. We got, in more recent years, we got MELS, so the Ministry of Education funding. And then we've had a history of being able to get grants, a lot through Canadian Heritage, not core funding, and that was a really difficult process for COCo to go through because we felt we should be receiving funding as an English-speaking group, but we were blocked out of that. So project funding from Canadian Heritage, COCo, the body that coordinates community work in the sector, we've gotten some grants from them. And what's interesting is we kind of grew to a certain point, had a lot of grants in place around 2006, 2007, and have now shrunk back to, although a slightly larger budget, it's still under $500,000. So COCo is still fairly small, and I certainly get the sense that our work or the way that we do it is not necessarily the flavor of the month anymore with funders, as we're seeing some other approaches that are coming on that seem to be getting a lot of new dollars coming in. So that's something for us to reflect on as we move forward. I think one of the learnings also is that you don't have to grow all the time, and not everybody may agree with that, but the idea of being small is okay as long as you're really focusing in on the things that you need to be doing. Programming, as I mentioned, has been pretty steady over time. We've had some projects that have taken a lot more ampleur, and then we've lost the funding. So legal work for a while was quite large and left us with a lot of different tools. We had the big In the Know research project, and now that's died down a little bit as we look more at it as community-driven research, action research, than simply doing one research project. One of the things that we've done all along in terms of our work in a lot of different ways is this idea of bridging the English-speaking groups with the broader Francophone community sector. And we've had a lot of different projects that have done it around informing people about what's going on in the Francophone sector, encouraging groups to get more involved in some of the networks and tables that exist. Then the In the Know research was a piece of documenting where that was at in the relationship with the federal government, and that seems to be an ongoing area that we continually are working on. We've done, in terms of our work, I think it's interesting to note that we've done two major evaluations. In 2003 we did an impact evaluation, and in 2010-11 we did another one. And what came out of the 2003 one seems to be holding steady, and the biggest message that I took away from that evaluation was COCo has an impact on community-based organizations. We help them figure out where they need to go, we help them untangle some problems, we help them understand their legal responsibilities, we help them reflect on how they want to be in their community and how they engage people. But we're only one piece of the puzzle, and the impact evaluation showed that other factors have a really big impact on organizations being able to do their work. An executive director suddenly leaves, funding gets cut, new funding comes in, has a large impact on how an organization can really be effective in terms of its social justice work. And I think that helped push us, that and other things help push us to be thinking a little bit less about individual organizations and really trying to tie it together and look at the work of all organizations and how we can influence things at a broader level, which is also really difficult work to do. And we see that with the movement building, that it's hard to really move beyond helping an individual organization think about how it does that, but really, really vital to do, because our work alone, as the evaluation showed, can only have so much of an impact on organizations. So programming, I think that's sort of the overview of programming that I can see in terms of how it's evolved. Another part of the kind of the house of how we can look at organizations is the question of structure, and there COCo has gone through an interesting evolution. As I had mentioned, we had the facilitators, and then we had two co-directors in the beginning. At one point I pulled back from the co-director work when I went back to school to do my doctoral work, and we moved into a director model. In 2005, 2006, Michael wanted to pull back from COCo and work on other challenges, and the staff team at that point looked at expanding the circles of ownership, so working in a more collaborative structure. And between 2006 and 2008, we went through a process with Tana Paddock worked with us a lot on it, Spencer Mann worked with us a lot on it, of looking at how we could have ownership by more people within COCo. We had a large staff team. We had at one point, I think, 9 people who were on the staff team, and we distributed the responsibilities around management and coordination among everyone. And that's the model that's pretty much stayed. The difference is all those wonderful projects that we had going closed down, and with time we ended up back to the point where now there's 3 people, so slightly larger than it was, not a co-directorship, but kind of 3 people involved, and a number of people who are working on contracts or who do projects or are available to do contracts as needed. So in some ways the model has almost come around full circle, because some of the questions that we can have now that pushed us towards wanting to have more shared ownership are things like, what is the role of people who work in projects? What is the role of independent facilitators who work with COCo in terms of being involved in some of that decision making? And how do we give some ownership, yet recognizing that there's some key people who are involved in the day-to-day kind of work? With the structure, the board also went through some work around that, because that was around the same time that the board was becoming larger, in part to receive funding from MELS, that we moved from a 5-person board and advisory committee to a 7-person board, and we talked about really wanting to engage with the membership more. It was also because the staff team at the time was very much interested in that idea and those larger circles of ownership. So as the changes were happening for funding, they were also happening in terms of staff reflections internally. And that's another one that is a continual process to be worked on. It's wonderful to see that we've got a strong board of directors in place now with some good continuity over time. There was a period as we were going through that change, understandably, lots of organizations when they go through those kinds of changes, it's not a place that a lot of board members want to stay for a long period of time because it's intense and it's hard work and there's a lot of conflict and a lot of communication that needs to happen and putting difficult issues on the table. So there was a while where we didn't have a lot of continuity with board members. We have that now, and so this whole question of membership engagement can perhaps move forward in a stronger kind of way at this point in time. One of the big things that came up around structure that I think is a learning for a lot of organizations is the whole question of accountability. When it's clear with a co-director or a director kind of where the buck stops, and then moving to a more collaborative structure, there was a lot of questioning about what is the role of the board and also decision making and accountability within the staff team. When we were going through the changes, one of the decisions was to keep programming going. It was in that period that we saw a dip in contracts, but it wasn't 2006, 2008, but it wasn't because of the staff team necessarily. We don't know what happened, but we were certainly answering the phone and staying very responsive to what people were asking COCo to work on them with. As a result, though, we were very slow in rewriting all the policies and having some of those deep policy discussions, and that's something I really wonder about and sometimes talk about with organizations as they're going through change, of maybe a little bit of a hiatus needs to happen, even if it's over the summer months or taking 3 or 4 months, to really pull back a little bit from the actual work and go back to the foundational questions and make sure that they're in place a little bit more strongly, because we struggled with that one for a while. Other elements that we look at when we look at the house that I think are interesting for this discussion, one of them is the whole external environment. And in terms of the evolution of COCo, it's very much connected to what's happening in the broader community sector. So there has been, and we've certainly seen, a move of more collaboration, partnerships, openness, both from the Francophone community sector, but also from our own sector, to working together. We got wonderful support from the Comité Activism when Marie Lachance was out, and then Danielle Jean, in terms of really with the government, and not with the government, but with the organizations that make up the formal community sector, to partner more and to collaborate and to understand more the English-speaking sector that we work with. And that's been an important one in terms of being able to move the work forward. The other one that I've really noticed in terms of a changing context is when COCo was getting started, there weren't a lot of people doing organizational change, and a lot of groups didn't really understand even what a trainer or facilitator from the outside was, or what we could do with them. Now it seems as if everybody and their cousin is hanging up their shingles and saying they do organizational change work in some way or another. And so that has an interesting impact on COCo. There's a lot more people out there doing the work, which is really nice, because I think organizations need a variety of choices of who they want to work with. But it maybe also means that there's certain areas that COCo can do a little bit less of that kind of work. We've seen a little bit around board roles and responsibilities. More people are doing that. And maybe we can increasingly take on more difficult questions that other organizations or individuals are not willing to take on. I think it also speaks to the importance of always reminding ourselves in groups that we are a not-for-profit. We live the same realities, and just the modeling of what we do, warts and all, the problems we go through, and talking about them is a really important contribution that we can make to organizational change work that not necessarily a lot of more independent or for-profit trainers out there can do. So those are some of the changes. There's probably lots more, but that's kind of the stuff I can think of right now. So some of the needs that COCo was identifying in the beginning, a lot of them were that groups were being asked to do things that they had no experience doing in the past. Deeper financial analysis, partnering with other organizations, planning. I mean, 2000 strategic planning in the community sector was still seen very much as something that was scary and people didn't necessarily want to get involved in it. And so COCo's was really addressing the need of, I think what was coming out a lot was the professionalization of the sector. As funders were asking groups to work in a different kind of way, groups didn't have the skill set necessarily, or didn't know that they had the skill set in order to be able to do that. And so that was an important one for COCo. The other one was the English-speaking community, which had always been there. We've certainly seen lots of new groups springing up. But I think there was also a stronger, with the work of the Quebec Community Groups Network, a stronger sense in some ways of the groups coming together. So there was a little bit more of an identification of being an English-speaking group, and the fact that some of the training and development work that was available in French was not available in English. So that was a big need. And one of the ways that has translated, that has not left, I mean, obviously the skills, individual capacity building with groups, but the importance of networking. Every time we do an event, one of the things that seems to come out of it for people is simply the opportunity to connect with others in English across different sectors that they work in. It's nourishing for people, and it's something that we seem to need to do. And I saw it at the most recent AGM also, how people were making those kinds of connections as being important. And so I think it's really neat also that we're doing this filming, and it'd be neat over time to get different people's senses of what the history of COCo is and how that impacts on where we are right now, because I think it's with that understanding that even if we have different understandings and the understandings change over time, it helps us understand maybe more how we need to move forward. One of the ways that I love that COCo has hung on to the history a little bit, because it's not just COCo and CES, but we come from a long history as individuals in the English-speaking community of being involved in community activism. Each room in this office has been dedicated, when COCo first started, to someone who was active in some way. So Mary Tuax in terms of rights for Native women, Warren Grapes, who was very involved rurally in terms of the English-speaking community, and a couple of others. And so I think that's a nice one that COCo has done in terms of trying to pull that history forward. So I'm glad that this video is part of that also.
Great. Well, thanks so much for talking.
Thank you. Curious to see what it looks like.